Hi everyone. So this is a video that I think it will be great in connection to the other Colbatch article. So this one by Adams and Walker and Colbatch on learning about learning. And I think that the pairing of this goes into focusing now on the kinds of things that we could do as to understand better how people make decisions around the environments in which we work, and the kinds of processes and kind of concerns that could frame our work as policy practitioners, policy workers within education, right? And so the idea of what does it look like when a a music practitioner, a music education practitioner, functions also as a policy work. And I think that what this really places forward very critically is that the policy work it's about this kind of interactive process, right? And right away on page 102, they talk about the idea, again, kind of pushing. They clearly have an agenda here to kind of move forward and beyond the kind of prescriptive texts that talk about big models, right, to something that is more meso level, more micro level, about interactions. But they say right away on page 102, I think it's really its center. They say policy work therefore involves working in teams, giving presentations, interviewing informants, communicating with clarity, and managing conflict, right? Since many of the kinds of things that we do as educators within schools and communities, right? Particularly when we have a view on or play a role in terms of a little bit more of a leadership role, right? But I think that this is really important also, is that we kind of somewhat flatten this kind of hierarchical representation of leadership, as and leaders having to do certain things, and only leaders having the authority to do certain things, including managing process, develop questions, kind of organize ways of not simply defining issues and finding solutions for those issues, but understanding kind of an ongoing process of addressing ongoing challenges. So a simple and powerful message here, if I had to focus, is, appears on page 103, which is the idea that a lot of what policy work is about relationships and framing. And a lot happens, in my opinion, or fails to happen, and when relationships are not, in a kind of work environment or in a collegiate environment, when relationships are really, somewhat either broken or not well kind of managed, or there's the space is a very highly hierarchical space, right? Or a lot happens or fails to happen when framing is also not well articulated. Either questions about who has the right to frame issues and present questions and attempt to new processes, or the simplicity or the complexity of the kind of framing environment. So how do we have a framing that is complex enough to the issue at hand, to the problem at hand? Do we understand framing as static or ongoing? And of course, how do we see the capacity of framing in a particular environment through and in relationship to those relationships, right? The other aspect of it, relationship and framing. How do we see that framing being adaptable enough to change over time? So I think that one of the interesting questions here is, how do you see this process of, how do you understand it? How are you able to what kinds of stories would you be able to tell to us if we look at policy and the quality of the kind of the policy as this kind of process in your own environments? If you went from this idea that policy is people trying to work out what they should do about a problem, right? What is the capacity that you see in colleagues and yourself? how and in what ways different environments in which you work dealt with that question differently. How would you place that question in, in your case, in the case that you're trying to develop, and seeing this? What is it that is happening into this environment, right? That resonates with this issue of relationship and framing capacity. Right? How might we have something to say about this, and in the process see these kinds of framings as ways of potentially changing the ways in which your own environment, or in your own case, might address policy issues. And connected to that, I think it's really interesting for us to consider what are as these kind of three categories that he talks about. The sites of learning, the idea of types of learning, and standards of learning within these policy discussions, right? In the work that Tuliki and I have done with Resonari, I think this applies really interestingly there. It is to see about how the leadership in Resonari first learn about policies and how to engage with them, how they, the kind of types of then decision makers that they made over time as they interacted with agencies, funding agencies, the public, different communities, other non-for-profits, right? And then the kinds of qualifications that they developed, and the kinds of group of individuals that they brought to work together with them, right? As an example of how organizations and institutions grow as they become more adept at creating this kind of policy environment where different kinds of relationships get established, and with that, growth takes place, funding takes place, contributions to issues of access, equity, and discourse take place, as well as how they then contribute, challenge, and disrupt the kinds of framings that are happening, framings about, historical framings about disability, about access, and so forth, right? And so I think that there's really interesting to see that these larger changes that we experience over time are actually functioning very, very much within the kind of these environments, right? And they have a lot to do with the kinds of learnings that these environments support, right? How people can be reflexive about that. In particularly in this relationship, this kind of connection, these kind of two aspects of relationship and framing as a set of capacities, right? That really impact policy work.